Welcome to the Soulfull Sound podcast. This podcast is about celebrating the leaders, teachers, and coaches who guide fellow humans to connect, heal, and discover themselves so they can express their gifts into the world. I am Niles, a coach, sound healer, vocalist, and author. Thank you for being here with me today. In this episode of the Soulfull Sound podcast, I'm joined by the wonderful Calvin Niles, who is a passionate communicator and mindful living coach, making a positive impact on the lives of leaders, entrepreneurs, coaches, and wider society through his services and products. He combines the power of his experience in public speaking, coaching, and business to help people discover their voice and step into their power. One of his popular services is helping speakers create signature talks, exploit their story, and boost their personal brand. He helps people mobilize their potential, whether selling from the stage, networking, or delivering their message to large audiences. Calvin has worked with hundreds of people, from leaders in large corporates to SMEs to solopreneurs and charities. Do you want to know how you can tell your story to impact your audience? In our conversation, Calvin shares the importance of telling your story, offers tips on how you can figure out what your story is and how to tell it well. He also speaks about the power of mindfulness and how you can start developing a mindful practice. Have a listen and join in the conversation. Well, I am so excited that you've decided to join me today, Calvin. Thank you so much for coming along.
I'm glad to be here. You're my sister, after all.
Yes. I have to say that when I first thought, I need to think of some really cool people to interview, I thought, I don't know if I should really interview my brother. Of all people. But you know what? You've got such a wealth of knowledge and so many wonderful things to share. And you create such an impact in the world that I thought, of course, why not? Why not do that? There'll be a disservice, in fact, not to have you on.
Well, I'm glad to be here. So thank you for thinking of me in that way.
Of course.
I know we are brother and sister, so sometimes I just don't actually take opportunity to do things like this as often. So I'm glad.
Yeah, me too.
Really glad.
So obviously I know you, so let me introduce you. So Calvin Niles, he's a passionate communicator and mindful living coach, making a positive impact on the lives of leaders, entrepreneurs, coaches, and wider society through his services and products. So that's beautiful. I love that. And I know a lot about the work that you're doing, and you've got so many things to offer. You speak about mindfulness and storytelling and things like that. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, well, it's really simple. I help people to cut through the noise to get to the heart of their story using mindful techniques, mindful principles, meditation, and how to really imbue their life with, I guess, the right qualities and the right attitudes to really get to their story. This is important for me because, as you know, I've been through some challenges myself, and getting my story straight and then being able to tell it in any impactful way was quite a challenge. So I'm essentially sharing some of the things that I've done myself.
Great.
To get to the heart of my story.
That's good. And you mentioned the words cut through the noise. What would you say that really means?
Well, I think we have a lot of head trash going on inside of our heads. More often than not, I would say 99% of the people that I encounter do, because we believe a lot of our own thoughts, which are not necessarily true. And I think what the mindfulness meditation does is it helps us to detach from the thought process to a degree where we can get clarity on what we're about, where we're going, what we want to say, what we don't want to say. And that's what I mean by cutting through the noise. So it is that dislocation from our thinking, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have so many thoughts coming through our mind at one, in one given moment. And I know how often I say to clients that not all of your thoughts are true. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that and just see them for what they are and be able to then distinguish the truth from that.
Well, apparently we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there is some research floating around out there that talks about the incessant thinking that people do. And I think we've come to a place in our sort of human evolution, if you like, where we think that thinking is the aim itself. But thinking is the tool.
Yeah.
And so we just have to be mindful to not let our thoughts lead us too much, because sometimes they lead us into places that are not helpful.
Yes, of course. We know there is definitely the disempowering thoughts and those that help us to make better choices. So how would you, if you could encourage someone to decipher through that, as you say, cut through the noise, and the thoughts are going to be there. They're there. We're alive. They're going to happen. What would be some of the ways that they could actually deal with all that noise?
Well, I think one of the first points is to recognize that we have to come with a willingness or an attitude at the beginning, from the outset. So I don't think, when a child wants to walk, the first thing the child wants to do is walk. Nobody forces the child to walk before it's ready. So I think there is a quality or an attitude that someone has to bring in the first place, which says, I recognize that there is a lot of head noise going on here.
Okay.
And then I want to cut through. So the first thing is that will or awareness or desire. After that, the work, as much as it can be challenging, becomes easier because we know that people are seeking a particular way to cut through. After that, the first thing I always say to people is learn to meditate. What the meditation does is it helps you to, watch your own thinking process. It gets you to cultivate what we call the observer, where we are not seeing things literally through our own eyes, but we seem to be seeing them from some other kind of view, which is disconnected from our thought process. So we're not thinking about what we're seeing.
Right.
We're trying to not think about what we're seeing by just observing it. And that comes with a whole host of other attitudes around, oh, hang on, I'm thinking about all this head noise that I'm having. Interesting. Why am I thinking about that? Oh, well, actually, I'm thinking about that because that's what the mind does. Point of awareness straight away.
Sure.
And then gradually you expand on these points of awareness until it becomes a habit. And slowly, you're able to, build that space between the event and the observer, or the observer and the observed. And that's really the biggest breakthrough that happens early on of meditation.
That's awesome. And would you say that, carrying that practice of meditation, certainly, but carrying it outside of the practice into practical conversations or communication with yourself and others, but let's say two people having a communication, is that then helpful for them to be the observer while they're actually communicating, or is this something that you would say happens mostly in reflection?
Totally. Live is a brilliant opportunity to do it because, let's, for example, say we're having a conversation right now. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not uncommon for a person to start thinking about what they're going to say next while the other person is still talking.
Yeah.
And so without cultivating the observer in everyday activity, we may not witness that. And then, therefore, we may not be able to listen properly.
Yeah.
And so having the observer in everyday activity is helpful for us to become aware of patterns of behavior that we have more and more, which essentially helps us to know thyself better each time.
Yeah. And what I find interesting is that leading into, doing these interviews and having these conversations, the one thing that I didn't want to do was stick to a script or have two prescribed questions, because I felt that, yes, being mindful and in the moment and having opportunities to, just go with the vibe and go with the flow, that would be so much more authentic than necessarily sticking to a list of prescribed questions. That's not to say that I didn't come prepared, and I have some ideas, because I know there's so much for you to offer people. I want to kind of grab as much as I can in a short space of time. But yeah, I absolutely think being able to, be spontaneous, be in the moment, be mindful, and also just really having a sense of deep listening for the other is so important in that communication.
Yeah. Deep listening, it just so happens, is a favorite subject of mine, because,
okay, great.
Look, I mean, deep listening is not only about listening to the other person, it's about listening to yourself. And this is another way of saying being able to observe, right?
Yeah.
And so the more that we're able to observe is a better we're able to listen to ourselves, is a better we're then able to listen to others.
Absolutely.
Because fundamentally our contact with people and experiences is interpreted by us. And that interpretation, what I call lens of perception, is all to do with our individual point of view or our angle or lens or whatever. And so actually deep listening, being able to really see and hear what's going on within us, is what allows us to listen to others.
What I would love to know, because I know that the word mindfulness these days, it's thrown around a lot. And what's your definition, or what's mindfulness for you personally?
Yeah, well, that's a good one, because a lot of people ask that question. What is it? I mean, there are a number of explanations and definitions, and as I particularly apply my own work, I try to avoid labels as much as possible, only to the point that that is helpful. Do I like to use labels? But then I also try to be aware of their confining or limiting effect. So simply, I think the easiest way to think about mindfulness is to just think about it as being aware.
Right, okay.
Purely, simply just being aware now. The path of mindfulness is to heighten our awareness constantly. If you were to consider what Western secular mindfulness teachers talk about, it is about being aware in the present moment, non-judgmentally. It's not a million miles away from being aware. But that one especially talks about the non-judgmentally side, is about helping us to see that it comes back to these attitudes again, because, it's very easy to, as soon as we become aware of something, all the head trash starts, and then we become judging about our own thoughts. But I think simply it is just about awareness, really, in the simplest terms, and continuing to grow in awareness.
Okay. And you speak about attitudes, the attitudes in mindfulness. Can you just talk a little bit about what those are?
So, again, this comes from very much a Western secular mindfulness school of thought, but there are some attitudes around, and interestingly, this is something that I talk a lot about, because I feel that the quality and the attitude that anyone brings to their daily life is far more important than anything else. I mean, you can sit down and meditate all day long, right? Can't you? Right? You can sit down and meditate, and then imagine after every meditation you think, that sucks, I really hated that, that was awful, or whatever. Then the attitude that we're bringing to it is not necessarily a constructive one. No. So there are such attitudes like, and they're in no particular order. How I like to describe it is like being, having a door to a house, which, or multiple doors to a house, which doesn't matter which door you take, you still enter into this state of awareness.
Right.
So one door can lead to the other door, can lead to the other door, and so on. So there are such, for example, attitudes like non-striving, like patience, like letting go, like acceptance. Two recent ones that John Kabat-Zinn, who's the Western father of secular mindfulness, added was generosity and gratitude. Right. Beginner's mind is an ancient one, which is about how can we bring this attitude of curiosity to our everyday activities in the simplest way. You know, for example, if you think you've just learned something and then you thought, oh, I know that already. Maybe the question could be, do I know that? Or am I right?
Yeah.
What says that I'm right? You know, and these kinds of things helps to just, it's always just gradually cultivating an attitude that is helpful and constructive to the actual practice.
Sure.
Which
And
is
I mean,
meditation.
in that example as well, that curiosity could be about taking it deeper. So it could be that you're right. It could be that you know it, but how could I take this deeper? How could I learn more? Because often I know how many times we think we know a subject matter and we're just scratching the surface. And so there's also an opportunity, always really an opportunity to take things a bit deeper with that beginner's mind, which is great because it means that you're always at the beginning.
This is one of the hardest things for deep thinkers or Western thinkers to do, because as soon as we go to school, we go to university, we go to college, we learn. Then we think once we've done that, we get into the world of work, we've got all the answers. And then everything is contextualized by what we've learned. But what we've actually done there is boxed ourselves in, because the boundaries have been created by what we've actually learned. So you will always hear learned people talking about or using the expression, you know, the more that I learn is the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah.
And it is that beginner's mind that allows for that process to happen with least resistance. It's kind of like when the Europeans thought that the world was flat. And then they went and, you know, they circumnavigated the globe and found themselves back where they started. They thought, hang on, the world isn't flat, the world is round.
Yes.
Think of how their minds opened up in that instant. Think about how when they didn't fall off the edge of the earth off the cliff or some sort of abyss, that they actually discovered, wow, there is a lot more here to the world than we actually realize. And I appreciate that's a really simple example.
Well, it goes this, you know, to say the same for recognizing human potential. You know, we also thought that man could only run a particular speed until someone broke the limit, you know, and now it's something that people are realizing more and more. And we do our best to kind of take it further and see how far we could take these limits, push these limits.
Yeah.
Because, you know, human potential is just being tapped. And we're recognizing that more and more across many fields. So I think it's great to have that, you know, that kind of thought around being open, being curious, and not necessarily closing the door just because of what you see presented in front of you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you say human potential, because, I mean, Jon Kabat-Zinn often talks about mobilizing your potential.
Yeah.
If you go back to the spiritual teachers of mindfulness, there are all these, you know, different schools. You've got the major and minor wheel, or the big wheel and the small wheel of mindful practice. People extrapolate that and talk about it all kinds of different ways. But the thing is all of them ultimately say that this heightened awareness allows us to discover our human potential or mobilize our human potential. That is not necessarily the end in itself.
Sure.
You know, there are funny stories about when Buddha was being challenged by his students about things, and they thought they were falling off the path, and then they thought they were back on the path, and, you know, oh, I want to be enlightened and this, that, and the other. And Buddha actually said to him, legend would have it, because I wasn't actually there. But,
you weren't?
Legend would have it that he said the real meat and principle of walking on the path is awareness itself. That's it.
Yeah.
Is awareness itself. All these other goals are byproducts of the awareness. The actual awareness is really the thing. So this is why the meditation practice, whether it's amazing or not amazing, is fine.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people think, oh, I need to have a blissful experience and so on. And this is why I think it's so empowering with the story work, because a lot of people who want to tell their story want to do it for marketing reasons, which is great, because people want to be able to sell themselves into the world in the best possible way.
Of course, yeah.
What sometimes happens is they realize that actually, I guess one of the benefits of using this tool to help people get to the heart of their story is that they can reframe their story in the first place, in the first instance. So this is to look at their experiences from a new angle or new lens, something that's much more constructive and reflective of these attitudes. But then at the same time, they actually get a step closer to letting them go as well.
Great.
Because the experience of finding and telling your story is only a step. You know, it is only a step fundamentally, and then the story itself is just becomes a vehicle rather than the end. And it becomes a vehicle for your mission. It becomes a vehicle for your message, for your call to action, or however it is you want to impact the world. The story is just the carrier of that. The story in itself then doesn't become the end.
Again, beginner's mind.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I definitely want to delve into your storytelling and things that you do there. But before I do, just to ask you one more question about mindfulness, because I'm really curious, and I'm sure anyone listening to, what you've shared so far would want to know, what is your personal mindfulness practice? What do you integrate? Is it a daily ritual, a daily meditation, or just generally, how do you integrate mindfulness into your life?
So, I have a couple of ways that I look at this. I think the first way is to have a habitual practice, which is not uncommon to a lot of people. You wake up in the morning, you go to the gym, you brush your teeth or whatever. One of the ways of forming a healthy habit pattern is to integrate some of this practice in your routine. So in the morning, I do a meditation every morning. Mm-hmm. I particularly do a type of mindfulness meditation called Vipassana. I don't teach Vipassana, but it is mindfulness meditation is rooted in Vipassana. There are about 50 or 50 something different versions of Vipassana meditation, to be honest with you. So, but my personal practice is Vipassana, which is essentially just body scan. I do that every day for an hour. And then throughout the day, I take opportunities to practice it in simple ways. If I'm walking to the train station, if I'm waiting somewhere, I might take in the five senses, sharpen the five senses a bit more. So, I might start to look around and look at the textures, look at the hue, look at the brightness, the luminosity, the smells, and all the five senses start to come into play. There's something, a takeaway tool that we tend to teach in mindfulness called the 3-minute breathing space.
Right.
And that is a really simple, bite-sized thing that, if you ever sort of had something going on in your life, in your daily routine, that has just irked you a little bit, you can feel your body's changing, the cortisol levels have spiked and you just feel a bit tight. And it often happened when I was in my corporate job. And so I started to practice then the 3-minute breathing space, which is a real short, bite-sized intervention, self-guided intervention. So the 3-minute breathing space is literally you take 3 minutes. And, you can break it down. You could say ABC. So the first one will just be have an awareness of where you are, become aware of around you, what it feels like to be where you are at this moment. You might be sat behind a desk. You might feel yourself there. And then you just go to your breath. That's the B. So you take your awareness to your breath, and then you just really tune in to your breath. So, just as we're sitting here now, you can probably just be aware of your breathing now. Just be aware of your breath coming into contact with your nose and filling into your lungs. And then you just consciously expand. And that's what the C is. You consciously expand. So that now that we're aware of our breath, now just consciously expand that awareness to your body. And you could start in your stomach, because you notice the breath going into your lungs, you notice your stomach expanding, and you may want to just visualize a bowl there and just consciously expand that bowl until your entire body is encapsulated in that bowl, and then feel all those parts of your body that are in that bowl. So there are little tools and little takeaway interventions you could use. There are tons and tons of them. So those are ways.
Was that first step then being aware of what it is that you're feeling, whatever that angst is that you've picked up or things that's going on in the body at that time? Then the second step would be to bring your awareness and attention to your breath. So you're just breathing consciously for that second, I guess, that second minute.
Yeah.
And then the third is just to notice the expansion in your body. Is there anything around releasing whatever that is within that expansion, or is that all just about the expansion, which naturally then releases whatever it is that you're feeling?
Yeah, the release happens by itself.
By itself, okay.
The act of being present now,
yes,
of being anchored in the present moment, by dint of its own expression, you've forgotten the past and you've forgotten the future. You're actually in the moment, because it is really the past and the future that imports this anxiety in the first place.
Yes.
So by anchoring ourselves now and using the tool that is our body to do that, and sharpening our mind onto this moment, then those things automatically just fall away. Because you're no longer thinking about what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of different things with many different steps around mindset and around changing state and physiology. And I think what's really precious about this is that it's really not about thinking. It's being very present and taking 3 very small steps. And they're all around awareness and all about being right here and right now. And breathing, a lot of the things that I do with my work with singers is really about connecting with the body, relaxing through the breath before they then, vocalize and sound. It might be a part of a basic warm up, but it could be something really about bringing the intention into their practice, or just letting go of any stress before we enter a vocal session, for example. So I think breath work is such a great, quick and easy step in. So I think that 3-minute breathing space is a great one to adapt. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the main thing is, take these tools and use them keep them as close to the essence as possible.
Sure.
But you use them in the appropriate scenario for you. Now, I mean, very well I'm a thinker, and probably the right expression is overthinker. And I
wasn't going to say, but
no, but I remember Mum. Well, when I left the airlines, it's over a decade ago now, and I didn't know what was going to happen for me. And I was running through all of these scenarios about what was going to happen in the future. And I actually used to get really strong headaches. So I actually remember the other day when you said to me, "Oh, I got a bit of a headache, Cal." I said, "Did you put the ice pack on the back of your neck?" And you said, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea." That used to happen to me sometimes. And I recognize that sometimes is... it could be all kinds of things, of course. But for me,
it was overthinking.
It was overthinking. And because what the thinking was doing was triggering a stress response in my body. And then my nervous system superhighway was carrying all these hormones. And essentially I would have this pain at the back of my neck and the base of my skull at the back. Excruciatingly, it was excruciating is probably misleading, because that seems like sharp, but it was like a strong, dull ache. Right. And if I had these tools back then, I would know how to cope much better with these things.
Yeah.
So it is really about being able to use very, very, very simple things in everyday life. If you've got the attitude, which is why I always start with the attitudes. If you've got the attitude, it becomes easier to do it, because this is such a simple thing.
Sure, yeah.
If you don't have the right attitude, you're not going to do it.
Yeah. So you were talking about back in the day when you were leaving the airlines. And so you went to Mum, and what did she say? What did she tell you?
She told me, chill out.
Yeah, just chill out.
No, she actually went, "Cal, you know what you're like, you're always thinking, your mind, this, that, and the other." And actually, until that point, I didn't really know that that's how I was.
Right. Okay.
It's only when she said, "You know what you're like, you can't stop thinking," I actually thought to myself, can I not stop thinking? See? So I went into another thought process straight away about whether I was thinking too much.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm very happy to say you've got the tools now. So never too late to add them. Okay, so I'm really keen. I'm really excited about the mindfulness, and I'm really keen to jump into some story stuff, because you kind of started hinting about how you integrate mindfulness in helping people to discover their story. And I know that you also help them to tell it.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your story, the storytelling side of your business and what you do.
So how I came across the telling your story was I was in public speaking some years ago. I was vice president of education for a fantastic organization called Toastmasters, which has changed a lot of people's lives by helping them to express themselves. And it just so happened that I was expressing myself at a time of significant perturbation for me. I was going through marriage breakdown, as you know. I was going through some really tough times in my corporate job. The outlook was not rosy, shall we say. So I was just doing public speaking for literally a bit of fun. And every time I got up and I spoke, I'd tell a story. What happened after that was a lot of people became interested in me mentoring them until I ended up having more people than I could serve waiting in a queue, literally waiting in a queue. I think I had something like 15 people around my corporate day job. By the way, I was doing all this for free because that's what you did. And I didn't understand what people wanted from me. So I asked. I just said, look, can I ask you a question? Can you please tell me why you want me to help you?
Yeah.
And they said, I want you to help me tell a story because you're really good at telling a story. So I thought, really? Am I good at telling a story? Amazing. I didn't even know that. Thank you. There's another thing on my awareness checklist.
Yes.
But meanwhile, the thinking never stopped.
Okay.
So when they said, I want you to help me tell my story because you're good at telling your story, is when I thought, okay, well, there's another thing I wasn't aware of. I can help people tell a story, because it's obviously a skill that I was practicing and didn't know I had. But that developed to a point where I was able to serve people, but the thinking still carried on, which is the main thing. The overthinking was still carried on, and a lot of it was not helpful. But the detachment from the thinking wasn't actually my conscious aim. Actually, my conscious aim at the time was to know what I needed to do. What was it that I needed to do? What was I all about?
Right.
Yeah. What does Calvin Niles stand for? What is his place in the world? And, where does he need to go now? Everything's crumbled. The marriage is over. Work is almost over. I was still in a corporate job, but I was on life support. And where to? To the point where I think I remember coming to you saying, I don't know, I'm totally lost. And that was the moment that I felt the mindful meditation would be helpful.
Okay.
To really help me figure out what I'm about. So then that became a phase of discovery. Okay. I need to discover what I'm actually all about. I need to discover, what are my gifts now? What do I do next? All of that stuff. Why, what, how, when, where, who, all that stuff. And then it helped. And I remember my last speech I did before I left the vice president of education role was a speech called Know Thyself. And it was only a 10-minute talk that I delivered. And that talk resonated with people to such a degree. Now, bear in mind, this was no longer about just telling a story about what happened yesterday or, Joe Bloggs and his dog. This was a very personal story. I talked a lot about things that happened and recontextualized them. And that clarity came with the silencing of the head noise, essentially. So there was an element of discovery there. What I then did was combined the discovery with the delivery. What originally started as delivery, helping people to deliver and tell a story impactfully, how to inspire your audience to action, and use all of those tools that that I learned myself and then helped people to learn as Vice President of Education are combined with the cutting through. Because this is the point, that the story is the vehicle. If you have nothing interesting to say, to talk about, no interesting impact to leave, then you just got a vehicle carrying air.
Right.
You're telling a story with nothing in it.
Sure. And so does everybody have something unique to share? Can you mine a story for everyone?
Yes, everyone has got a unique combination of knowledge and experience, even though they may not think it. Because as long as you're alive, you would have gone through something.
Yeah.
And then you would have learned something from it. And those two things in itself already are enough for you to start to weave your own story. But it may be just the narrative is not developed.
Yeah.
And I remember once I was doing a workshop and I had this guy and he's really cynical, this guy. I've told you this actually.
Okay. So
and he, so just imagine a really cynical person in the corner distracting you from delivering your workshop. And this workshop was about your story, how to find and tell your story. And he said, look, I really don't mean to be rude here, but he was a Scottish guy. So you're like, I don't mean to be rude, mate. But he said, not everybody is going to have some amazing story that they can tell. And they're not going to, be like Barack Obama on Inauguration Day with millions of people, and marching an army over a hill. I said, but you're telling me then that you don't have a message. You don't have a message that a story can carry for you. What is your message to the world? I asked that question. And he said, I don't know. And he shrugged his shoulders. So I said, okay. And I did the deathbed exercise, which is a common one for a lot of coaches to use around, visualizing your last moment and, what would you do and so on. So this exercise, you're on your deathbed and, really took him through this place where, these people are starting to coalesce around your bed and they're looking down on you. Who are they? Who are they? Who are these people? They may be shadows at first, but then they start to turn into people you recognize. First thing is, who are these people? It might be your mom, it might be your partner, it might be your brother, sister, whatever. And this starts to take shape. And you're just about to die and they're sharing this moment with you. And you only have one breath left. You've only got one thing you can say. What is that thing? Right? So he's still, really cynical. His body language was kind of like, in a straitjacket type of body language. There's a lot of resistance. And he just went, I'd just say, bye. So, oh, wow. But I said, well, there you go. What is actually happening there is you do have a key message, which is part of your story, which is that people just need to lighten up, or people need to not take things so seriously, or people just need to have a bit more fun, or whatever. Put it however you want. There's something around his own personal view that people just need to chill out a bit and have some fun or whatever.
I think that's great that you were able to pull that from that. I didn't think that. I was like, what does that mean by, I had this conversation as you're going through it and leading us through this exercise in my head, that what would be my last words? If I have my family around me, it would be, I love you. And I will always love you, those kind of things, because there, I have a lot of love in my life, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm sure I could bring all of that out. But that, I was like, what are you going to draw from that kind of, very, very comical, bye, see ya. So I think that's great. So it's a really good step. And, for a lot of people who may not necessarily delve deep into this, that's a great example of there is always something behind the behavior or behind the words that come out. And I think what's very interesting for me, as you spoke about your story and how you began storytelling, is that you came to a place where, you had a lot of things going on in your life around your marriage, breakdown of your marriage, as you said, and work. And you were able to come to a place of acceptance, which I know you spoke about is one of the attitudes in the mindfulness practice, but also acknowledging where you were at that time. As you said, you came to me and said, look, I'm just lost. As opposed to thinking you needed to have all the answers, you just acknowledged where you were in that present moment. And leading on from there, being able to then deliver that speech or that talk to your, to the members of this association and talk about know thyself. And it really talks about being able to be vulnerable, because to share something personal, as you said, rather than what happened yesterday and what I might do in the next job interview or whatever, you're taking it to a personal level, which I think is really precious. And not everyone is able to necessarily go into that. So how do you guide people through that vulnerability and being able to be, I suppose, authentic with whatever their story is?
So this is where the key attitude of non-judgment comes in to play, because most people say, oh, but I don't know what my story is. And then after that, they say, well, no one wants to hear my story anyway. And then after that, they say, I've not been in a plane crash or, lost a limb or, had some miraculous turnaround from being a paraplegic to now, flying gliders or whatever it might be. And the point is that people discredit their own experience through the judgmental voice in their head. So the one of the first things is distancing yourself from that noise, which is why the meditation is so helpful. Then we can actually have a normal conversation around that when we're on the coaching journey. As we're talking right now, we might say, what have you reflected and seen? Well, I've noticed as I was writing this story, I started to cringe, somebody might say. I started to think, oh, well, no one wants to hear this. Okay, but what have you seen now? Now that we're growing in awareness, what happens is people then start to see that they're actually judging themselves.
Yeah.
So then another attitude or another effort towards relinquishing the judgment helps people to free themselves from that. And there then it becomes easier to be vulnerable. And hence why I call it the vulnerability paradox, because it's paradoxical in the sense that you are becoming more vulnerable, which by the dictionary definition means opening yourself to the potential to being hurt or harmed. But actually, the fact that you've chosen to be vulnerable and you've cultivated this attitude of acceptance, self-acceptance and non-judgment is that you actually don't care whether you're hurt or harmed. And the likelihood is that you aren't, because you don't care what everybody thinks.
Yeah. That's
so
awesome.
It's a paradox in the sense that, what other people think actually doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I think that what comes through, the message that I'm hearing about a lot of the people that come to you for this work is that my story needs to be this massive inspirational happening, comparing themselves to, large influencers out there who might have achieved great things, or feeling like they had to be at their lowest point in life and, as you say, climbed Mount Everest and done something remarkable, when, it is remarkable to talk about, I gave birth to my first child, or I've been suffering from backache and I managed to get out of bed this morning. Those things are quite, they make up the steps, no matter how small they are, of something great. And I think it's really good to acknowledge that it doesn't have to be this, this perception of something huge and this big mastery of achievement before a story can be, brought out of you. Because as you said, we all have stories, we all have experiences in life that we can learn from. And it's really about how we can share those.
Can I just say about the story?
Sure.
The point about doing the story work is, remember what I said at the beginning, is that the story is the vehicle of your message or your key message. So the story work that we do or that I do with my clients is not about just having stories for story's sake.
Yeah.
The exercise really in the combination of distancing or cutting through the noise or distancing from the thoughts and doing the story mining is it is sort of a rational versus mystical, if you want to say, two-pronged approach. So the meditation is very much a spiritual thing where there's work happening, but you can't really logically always explain everything about it. All the awareness is happening for you, but things are happening. And then the story mining is a very logical, academic type of approach. Then what happens is through the story mining and you start to look at your own story and form them, a message becomes clear to you.
Yeah.
Then that message is then used to formulate your key message, which is what you will use to impact the world with.
That's awesome.
And then your key message is driven in the vehicle of the story. That's what the story is for. That's the way I work with people. So we're not just doing entertainment stories here.
Sure.
And a lot of people come to that realization very early on because on some level they actually know that they don't want to do an entertainment story, but they just don't understand that they don't want to do an entertainment story.
Yeah. Yes, I've had many people over the years come to me for vocal coaching when really what they wanted was sound healing or, life coaching or things like that. So I completely understand that that entry in sometimes consciously or unconsciously is not quite what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's really where the real work gets done. Then when we move into the delivery side, that's when it becomes fun, entertaining. How to deliver it so it sticks to the audience. How do people go away remembering you? How do you make them feel inspired? How can they tell it in such a way that it resonates with their emotions? All these things, that then comes with the delivery. So this is where the combination of discovery delivery, what I mentioned earlier, this is where they combine.
I love that. And so if you could just give 3 practical tips on how someone could tell their story well. So they've mined the story, they've gone through discovering what it is, they've extracted their message. We know how important it is to figure out what that is. So now they come to telling it. What are those 3 tips that, for them to tell it well, for them to do a good job?
Well, I think one of the first things is, and we've mentioned it earlier, is about bringing the attitude of non-judgment all the time. It's quite easy to slip back into thinking you're inadequate or, my story is not good enough and this kind of thing. So I think as much as that is not a delivery skill, it is a quality that needs to be brought when you are telling your story at all times.
Great.
Your story is good enough. And guess what? People do want to hear it. As long as you've learned something valuable from that, it's going to help somebody else. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is know your stories. Formulate your story shelf, in other words. When we do the mining, what happens is a number of stories are defined. Sometimes people remember things that they hadn't remembered for, their entire life since the event happened. Far less being able to interpret it, far less being able to turn it into a key learning or far less into a key message. Once you do that, the important thing is to catalog those stories into a shelf. So we talk about the different types of stories there are. They're what I like to define. There are a number of different types of stories. The 4 common stories I work with a lot are what people call me stories. These are stories that help the audience to know who I am as a person, what I've been through, and my challenge, so on. That helps to build trust and so on, engender trust with the listener. Then there are you stories. That may be a story, coaches particularly like this one, which it might be a story of a client's journey, something that happened with a client or a customer or something like that. Then there are vision stories, my vision for the world. Some people in charities will use vision stories quite a lot. We believe in a world where water is free for all, for example. That's a vision story.
Yeah.
Or equality of economic equality or what have you. And then organizational stories are quite common for leaders in business who really want to take the organization and teams with them through a journey of change. And so those stories matter in those instances. So what I would say is, number one is to bring the attitude of non-judgment.
Yeah.
Number two is to stack your story shelf, which is to, to really mine your stories. Now, having done all of that, you're going to have a load of material. You're going to have loads of stuff that you could potentially talk about. And this is where the trimming becomes important. So number three, I would say a really important part here is to make it succinct. We don't really want to talk about 3 different stories to deliver the same message, for example. And that's a lot to do with your delivery style and content creation, and how that is refined. So those are 3 things I think that would be really helpful for people to literally take away right now, and do without my help. You know, take that attitude of non-judgment, mine your stories, and make it succinct.
That's wonderful. I think that's great. And I like the stories that you've mentioned, me, you, vision, and organizational. When people come to you wanting to go through this experience, do they know what story they want to tell, or is this something that they learn through the experience?
So very often how I work is I will ask the person at the very beginning, do they have a key message that they want to share?
Right. Okay.
Then once we understand what that key message is, which sometimes involves a lot of mining, because I think what will happen is somebody will come with one message, then we'll do the mining to find the stories that, so should we say, validate that message, and find that the stories that we've been mining actually give another message.
Yeah.
And then an epiphany may happen and the person will go, I was talking all about eating healthily, where actually what I really mean is we need to have a balanced approach to life generally, or whatever, as an example.
Yeah.
So once that happens, we can work on anything.
Yeah.
It depends on the audience. It depends on what purpose you're trying to serve. A lot of people come to me, of course, because they're delivering a talk. But more recently, I've been working with people to create online content. I actually had somebody who wanted to work with me to help them write their story for their book. And I said, look, I'm not a book coach. She's like, I don't care, Calvin. I'm working with you.
Amazing.
So
you know what you want.
you do get all kinds of needs and desires from people. But me stories tend to be the most powerful for people in the work that I do, because it's such a personal service.
Yeah. I think this is so much of a wealth of knowledge. I'm so glad that you came on and, was able to share about this. And it's really interesting how you integrate mindfulness and storytelling and bringing that all out. It would be interesting to know just generally, I know that you're an avid reader. I know you like to read and you're a writer as well. Who's your favorite author, or what's a favorite book you might have read that has influenced your life so far?
Oh, man. Well, I guess the thing is with books is like with anything, right? It's always relevant, or your perspective is always determined by where you are in any given moment in your life. If I work with you on your key message today, I may work with you on a key message 2 years from now, and it might be completely different. And that's actually fine.
Yeah.
And so
we grow and evolve, don't we?
We grow and evolve. We're constantly growing and evolving. And that's the other thing, the key thing about mindfulness. I always say, look, it's not a prison sentence. This is not a prison sentence. One thing that all mindfulness teachers always talk about, particularly Buddhist mindfulness practitioners, is what the ancient Sanskrit or Pali word is, anicca, which means changing, constantly changing. And if we can accept that things are always, constantly, always changing, then we never actually feel imprisoned by anything. So I think with that in mind, some of the books that come to my mind now are by Letting Go by David Hawkins.
Okay.
He is a spiritual teacher and researcher. He's an ex-psychiatrist who went on a spiritual journey, and boy, can I say it's his writing is very impactful. It has been for me, especially at the time of intervention. Another one of his books is Power versus Force, and he really sets out very clearly the difference between power and force, and how when you are getting in touch with yourself and getting in, know when you do know yourself or know thyself, then you are in power. And when you're fighting against something or trying to force anything to happen, then you're in force, and power wins every time. I know, interestingly, at the end of that book, he also, in one chapter, manages to describe the entire enlightenment journey in about 5 minutes. So that's quite interesting.
Just go and get that last
read chapter 24 of Power versus Force. That's it. Don't do anything else. You're good.
I love that. Well, you said succinct, right? That's it.
Exactly.
Less is more.
It's the simplicity.
That's awesome. Okay, so what inspires you generally? What do you say is a big source of inspiration for you? And again, with us talking about what you've just said in terms of right now in your life, I'm happy for you to talk about something in the past, but certainly what's inspiring right now for you?
Sorry, my mind is still in the books.
Yes.
Now you got me on a roll. What inspires me? So I tend to get inspired when I'm doing stuff. I tend to get inspired when I'm exercising, after meditation, or after quite a nice long rest. I can't say specifically that, I actually listen to this song to get inspired, or stuff like that. Of course, reading is very inspiring. I tend to go for walks. It became a pastime of mine when I moved into Weybridge by the river, and I used to walk there. And I tend to get a lot of inspiration when I go for walks in the forest. And I think we're going for a walk next week, aren't we?
Yes, we are. I can't wait.
So, yeah. So I tend to get inspired, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Spontaneously.
Yeah.
Spontaneously. But yeah, there's, going to the gym, things like that.
Yeah. And I think that, being around nature itself for me is quite inspiring, just reconnecting with Mother Earth and, knowing that there is no disconnect between us and nature is so powerful. So it certainly creates a space, if it doesn't inspire in itself, certainly creates a space for inspiration to land in your lap. I love that. So I'm really excited about our long, or I don't know how long, but our long nature walk next week. Yes, definitely. So I know that you have an ebook available on Amazon, so I do want to just talk very briefly about that. It's a complimentary ebook called An Unfinished Mosaic, Life Lessons from a New Perspective, and that's obviously written by you, Calvin. So just give us a little bit about what that book is about so we can go onto Amazon and have a look.
Well, thanks. So the book is no longer complimentary.
Okay, that's fine. Not complimentary ebook.
because it was in such high demand that I started to sell it. The book itself is a collection of stories. They're very short stories that I've written, which are essentially snapshots of my own experience, and they have been distilled into key messages. So what actually happened, what did the journey feel like, and what I learned from it, essentially. So it's maybe a graphical representation of how you would mine your own stories and then how you would turn them into meaning. Interestingly, you may reflect on a story at a different point in time, and you may take another message from it, depending on where you are in your life, as we talked about a minute ago. So those stories were written over a period of a couple of years, and they've been, I suppose, helpful for me to make sense of my own journey. And they've also been helpful to let it go, because actually there comes a point where after we identify and define and redefine our stories, we are able to then release them as well.
That's awesome. That's brilliant. So definitely we'll put some links for all of these things. And if you want to connect with Calvin or learn more about his work, then please do find him at calvinniles.com.
Mm-hmm. Or on Facebook.
All on Facebook, on social media, Instagram, and all that yummy stuff. I will put the links at the bottom of this podcast so that people can find you easily.
I'll also like to add some more to the reading list as well, because there are probably like 10 to 15 books, which I think are so amazing. I'm not going to list them all now, but I really think that have been pivotal for me on my own journey of healing in the last few years and coming to terms with my own story and so on, that I think would be really helpful to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very pleased about that, as I'm sure the authors would be. So thank you so much for joining, Calvin.
Thanks.
I am so happy, as your big sister, as well as someone who has, benefited from your work. I came to one of your mindfulness workshops and was blown away, not just by your delivery, but just by the experience that you created for busy, go-getters to come along and just to tune out and tune in. And I think that was really special. It was great to witness. And I certainly have taken a few takeaways to work with and add to my own practice and rituals. So I'm very grateful about that.
Thank you.
So continue to do the work you're doing in helping people to figure out their message and story, using those mindfulness practices, and more than anything, helping others as you do for yourself make a greater impact in the world.
Thank you. And I wish you every success with your new project.
Thank you so much. So I have one very final question for you, and that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? Your soulful sound is a self-prayer or wish or desire that you have right now for the world.
I like that. Well, the way I translate that is what's my key message, I guess.
Sure.
And that is that everybody has the opportunity to get in touch with their inner voice. And now is the time to do it, essentially. So my prayer or wish or desire would be for everyone to take the opportunity to know thyself.
That's awesome.
And if not today, which day?
Yeah. All we have is now. Love you lots.
Love you too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with your friends and remember to subscribe. From my heart to yours, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.